Well, welcome to a live edition of E.W. Jackson for America. I think you all know I was away in Colorado the entire week and did not have an opportunity to do any live programs because I'd have been doing them at 6:30 in the morning, which would have meant getting up at 5 o'clock, 5:30 in order to be ready. And I had too many other things on my plate to do. Let me get rid of my props here. But I am glad to be back live with you. There's plenty to talk about. In case you missed it, by the way, I did do Truth and Liberty live on Thursday. I was in the Colorado studios at the time that I did it. Also was preaching at Central Baptist Church in Kannapolis on Sunday morning, and they aired that live. Central Baptist Church, I think that's archived, and I think we'll be grabbing it and putting it on our stuff as well. So be sure to check those things out. And in the meantime, I hope that you enjoyed what we had for you while I was gone, while I was away, because obviously we've got plenty in the archives. And of course, numero uno, the number one issue right now for us in terms of our organizational activity is our June 11th dinner coming up. What's the day? The 7th, right? So we are now almost just 4 days short of being exactly 1 month from the dinner. And I really do need your help, as always, with these things. I mean, these are big undertakings, folks. We're expecting 200 to 300 people out from around the country. And we've got, thank God, we've got a bunch of sponsors already. I think don't hold me to the exact number, but I think we got 21, 22 sponsors. The maximum number we've ever had is 23. We're shooting for 50. That means I've got a month to bring on another 25, 26, 27, 28 sponsors, depending on how many we actually have now. We might already be at 23, so I haven't done the exact count yet because sponsorships were added. I was working on this last week, of course, but I really do need your help. It's going to be on June the 11th at the Cornerstone Chapel, and that is 650 Battlefield Parkway Southeast in Leesburg. I ought to know that by now. The dinner starts at 7 for sponsors. There's a reception at 6 p.m. For the sponsors and their guests, of course. And for our honorees once again are Brigitte Gabrielle, Pastor Johnny Hunter, Sandy Rios, Pastor Gary Hamrick, and the late Bishop Dean Nelson is receiving an award posthumously. His wife and the new president of the Frederick Douglass Institute will be there to receive that award. We've got participation, not sure whether they will make it or not because they'll be voting that night, but we've got Senator Josh Hawley participating. We've got Senator Ted Cruz participating. We've got Congressman Bob Good participating. Again, we just don't know who's going to be able to show up because they're voting that night, and if they're voting, obviously they won't be at our dinner. But if they're not voting, then they may well be able to make it to the dinner, some of them anyway. Not sure who or what, and don't have any commitments in that regard because of the voting that's taking place. So please put that in your schedule. The tickets are $125. We do have some complimentary tickets that we're going to start giving away here starting, I think, May the 11th is when we'll start giving those away, about a month before the dinner. Because we got a number of sponsors who said, look, I'm going to sponsor. I can't make it. I'm going to sponsor. I can only use 2 tickets. Give the other 8 seats at my table, other 6 seats, because the tables are seating 8 this year. Give the other 6 seats at my table away. So that's what we're going to do. So we'll have a number of complimentary tickets available per the generosity of our sponsors, and thank God for them. Let's see, I think that's really all I need to put out there right now because, and again, folks, that is critically important. We are counting down now. We are not quite a month away from the dinner, but it is coming up fast. And this dinner comes at a time when the economy is down. We all know that, when people are under crunch for their normal expenses, gas and food and all of that. So we've got some headwinds. But we're believing God for a great outcome. I want to remind you that in the last 2 years, spontaneously, without me requesting it, spontaneously in the last 2 years, Donors have stepped up and said, I believe in what you're doing. I want to help you. I will match dollar for dollar for everything you raise up to $100,000. We've had 2 donors do that, 2 separate donors. And we've met that mark. In fact, I think we're almost there now in terms of not money in, but money pledged. And we don't have a matching donor yet. We don't have a donor who says, look, you raise $100,000, I'll give you another $100,000 to match it. So maybe you're that donor, or you know someone who is committed to my work and has the resources and wants to do that. I mean, we'd love to institutionalize this so that every single year we've got someone to do that. I really believe God gave us that the first 2 years to indicate to us, well, here's what you need to do in order to really make this a significant event. That's why we're going for 50 donors rather than 50 sponsors rather than the usual 20-some sponsors, because we want to double the amount of revenues we take in because we really want to raise the necessary revenue to run the organization for a year, so that everything else that I raise on top of that can be for program purposes and doing things that are not part of our normal operating budget. So, folks, you solicit first your prayers and then your contribution. So again, even if you can't come, you can't afford a ticket, you can do something, right? And remember, we have Patriot Partners starting at $5 a month. Going all the way up to $2,000 a month. So I'm asking you to become a Patriot Partner. If you give $25 or more a month, I will send you a free signed copy of my book. And my book is still doing very, very well, particularly everywhere I go. I mean, they just really fly off the shelves, or maybe I should say fly out of the box. So people, and I get great feedback from people who've read the book. They say, I've read it, and it was tremendous. As I said before, folks, I am grateful to God for giving me the ability to write and to communicate, because that is really my book. It is not ghost written. It is written by me. And those words are my words. And I thank God for the help I had with editing, and I did have some people helping me. Obviously, my publisher helped me with editing and so forth. But what they had to work with was my creative work. And so when you read that book, believe me, when you walk away from that book, you will know me pretty well. Not as well as my family does, of course, but you'll know a lot about me. You'll know a lot about me, you'll know a lot about my life, and you'll know a lot about my thinking, and you'll know a lot about my patriotism and where it comes from. Because the book was really the book, and in a way, it's really dedicated to our country. Sweet Land of Liberty, Reflections of a Patriot Descended from Slaves. And it's an homage to our country and an explanation of why do I love this country so much. And I explain that because, of course, all around the world, people are telling us, your ancestors came here as slaves, and we're resentful, and we're bitter, and we're owed reparations. Please, your reparations were to be born an American. You hit the proverbial lottery when you were born an American. You ought to be thanking God every day of your life. I don't care what the color of your skin is, but I won't get off into that. We got other things to talk about. You know where I stand on that one. So okay, let's get into this. Now, those of you who've watched me, listened to me for a while, you know I'm not a conspiratorial thinker. I militate against it, because I think it's lazy thinking and I think it's easy thinking. That doesn't mean there aren't conspiracies now. That doesn't mean they don't exist. And that doesn't mean people don't engage in conspiratorial activities trying to undermine the country, or that no one is doing that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that at all. Conspiracies do exist. We have a whole legal system. I should say we have a whole legal framework around punishing people for conspiracies to do things. So we know conspiracy exists. But I think it's an easy explanation too often when there's something deeper going on. I mean, I think the ultimate conspirator is the devil. Satan, Lucifer, he's the ultimate conspirator. He's the ultimate shot caller. He's the ultimate puppeteer who is moving and manipulating and deceiving and lying to people and kind of getting people doing his bidding, which is not hard for him to do when people reject God, because we don't live in a spiritual vacuum. You can't say, well, I'm spiritually neutral. No, you're not. Because if you're not on God's side through Jesus Christ, you're on the devil's side. It's just that plain and simple. I know that's not something that people particularly want to hear, but Jesus said, he that is not with me is against me. He didn't say, well, he that is not with me is in a neutral zone and we can talk and negotiate. He said, no. Either your friends who are unsaved don't want to hear that, right? Your family's unsaved don't want to hear that, but it's still the truth. And maybe people need to hear that in order to be confronted with the reality of where they are spiritually. So at any rate, I tend to be very resistant to conspiratorial explanations of things. However, I really do believe that there is a behind-the-scenes effort on the part of many, and I don't know who all is in the inner circle of this. I can do speculation purely, okay? I certainly believe George Soros is, and I believe a lot of these big tech people like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg are, and I really believe Oprah Winfrey, I understand, was invited to be at one of these early World Economic Forum meetings and trying to get this whole thing set up and trying to make these globalist plans. I don't know where Oprah stands, except I know Oprah's godless. I know that. So I don't know who the players are or who the main players are, but I believe George Soros, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, I should put him right at the top of the list with George Soros, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, all these players who are not only politically dangerous in my view, but they are morally suspect as well. I think these people are degenerates. Yeah. And I think that includes George Soros. I don't know much about the man, but I know he rejects God. And when you reject God, again, what standards do you hold yourself to? Well, whatever feels right to you. And we know where that leads, into the abyss. So I don't know who the main players are, but I really do believe that something is going on and that there are certain people with vast amounts of influence, particularly over the left, of course, over the Democrat Party, of course, who are maneuvering for the fundamental transformation of this country. And of course, one of the end results is going to be more power in their hands. Because that's always the name of the game. When people are operating out of a framework of sin, it is never about service to people. It's never about service to people. Let me repeat that again, because that's straight off the Holy Ghost presses, folks. When people are operating out of a framework of sin, it is never about serving other people. It is always about serving themselves, their own selfish ambitions, desires, wants, and needs. That's what it's all about. So these folks, the ultimate goal is not to serve America. Oh, we're going to make America such a better place. The ultimate goal is we're going to have power over this. And since we know what's best for everybody, we're going to be able to control everything. Which is what the American people need. They're just too stupid to know it. And so I wanted to share with you some pieces that I think go to one of the strategies that they are using, or at least they are holding in the background as one of the ways they think they're going to be able to accelerate this revolution that they're carrying out. I guess a day or two ago, Maxine Waters said that the DOJ needed to investigate Trump supporters, that would include me, probably would include most of you watching, because they're training for civil war. Now, here's one of the things we know about these people. When they accuse us of something, it's because that's what they're doing. Okay? When they accuse us of something, it is because that is what they are doing. It's always projection. And they're diabolical about it. In some cases, I think they're conscious of it. They know that this is what they have in mind. They know that this is what they're doing. But they also know that the best way to hide their hand, the best way to deflect away from attention on them, is to accuse other people of doing it. So we're up in the hills preparing for civil war. I'm not up in anybody's hills preparing for civil war. In fact, I have cited polls repeatedly that indicate a vast number, a plurality in some cases, or a near majority in some cases, depending on which poll you listen, you read, of Americans really believe that we are going to end up in a civil war. And they believe it because the division is so stark and so irreconcilable. As I've said before, you can't reconcile, even though I know there are Republican establishment people who think you can and you can resolve it, but you can't really reconcile those who believe that abortion, as they like to sanitize the process, the practice, is the killing of a human being. And those people who believe that there's not only is there nothing wrong with it, but it's great. It's something to celebrate. Now, how do you reconcile those two? You can't. We want to celebrate murdering a human being, and we want to protect the human being. Okay, well, let's compromise in the middle. You know, like Solomon said, well, I'll tell you what. Let's cut the baby in half. The woman whose baby it was, who loved the baby, said, no, give it to her. Because she knew that it was more important that the baby live than that she have the baby. And so she said, no, give it to her. And Solomon said, okay, you're the real mother. I mean, and because that was no compromise at all. So we will compromise. We'll cut the baby in half. I mean, well, you can't do that with the killing of an unborn baby. I mean, in other words, there's no way to cut it in half, right? There's no way, and you know what I mean. I'm not talking about literally, but there's no way to negotiate that. I mean, there are those who believe you can kill an unborn baby, and even if the baby is born alive and it was intended to be an abortion, you can still kill it or just let it die, and that's perfectly okay. That's perfectly all right. And those of us who say, no, that is a human being from the moment of conception with all the DNA blueprint that will develop into the person we will come to see and know if that person is allowed to live. And who in the world do we think we are, even asking the question, well, should we allow the baby to live? That's playing God. How do you compromise that? How do you compromise when people say, well, we think that a kindergartner, we think that a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old is ready to make decisions about their gender, and we want to give them the ability to come out. We want to give them the ability to choose their own gender. And it might be a girl in a boy's body or a boy in a girl's body. And we want to teach that to young people because we know this is really going to be great for them. And people who say, are you crazy? Have you lost your mind? I mean, and look, and some people who will go so far as to say, as I would say, if you did that to my child against my will, and it would be against my will, without my knowledge, without my consent, because you wouldn't be able to get my consent, and you wouldn't be able to get me to go along with that, I will hurt you. Now, I know that you're not supposed to say that, but look, my children are grown now. I mean, we're not raising any children. We got a granddaughter. Did you all see Quiet on the Set? Whew. If you haven't seen that, you ought to watch that. Want to talk about conspiracies? Talk about how Disney hired people who were convicted sex offenders and is still doing it. They say Disney's stock is cratering and their viewership is cratering. I wouldn't send my... You know what? I'll tell you the truth, folks, and I don't have the authority to speak for my daughter and her husband with regard to my granddaughter, but if it were up to me, I'll go on the record and say, if it were up to me, I wouldn't let her get anywhere near Disney. Disney is nothing at this point but a haven for perverts. I wouldn't trust anybody wearing a Disney uniform to get anywhere near my granddaughter because they have no standards at all. In fact, I think that there is within Disney an element of pedophilia that is operating under the radar. Because why in the world else would you hire people who are known sex offenders, who are known pedophiles? Why would you do that? I mean, who would do that? By an organization that you know the primary market of that organization is children? Who would do that? No, you only do that because there's a wink and a nod that says, well, you know, we know what we got going here, and so come on in. Nobody will know the difference. And all the other pedophiles will wink and nod and carry out their sick, perverse fantasies with children and use that opportunity to exploit children and to touch children. If you saw this, the young man who was the primary victim, who got this Nickelodeon guy convicted, his father, and man, I tell you, oh Lord, folks, whew, I'm so glad that wasn't me. I'm so glad God never put me in a position like that. I really am. I really am. Because, you know, I thought to myself, this father had suspicions, but he never really told his son. He did say to his ex-wife to watch this guy who was trying to basically, in his view, groom his son. But he's describing, in fact, they showed a film of him interacting, the same guy, interacting with Leonardo DiCaprio. And I'm trying to find these. Oh, here we go. Here we go. There were several of them convicted, I think, in the same year. Izelle Channel, Jason Hardy. Who was the main guy? Wow, his name ought to be jumping out here first. But he was the first one to be convicted. Oh, yeah, here he is, Brian Peck. Brian Peck. But he showed a piece of video of him interacting with Leonardo DiCaprio when Leonardo DiCaprio was a teenager. And, you know, he's talking to him, and he's running his hand over his shoulder and running it down his arm. And, you know, you could just see, he just used every opportunity to touch him, to caress him, really. Because it wasn't like a guy, you know, patting another guy on the shoulder or patting him on the back or giving him a manly hug. It was like... And the father suspected what was going on and was trying to keep him away from his son. Oh, yeah, and the guy's name, Bell, who's the kid's name that was, yeah, Drake Bell. Drake Bell was his victim, then 15, 16 years old. But he ultimately manipulated Drake Bell away from his father. And I thought to myself when I was watching this, and I don't want to blame his father because, you know, we each, I mean, people have their own proclivities. I mean, he was smart enough to see something was going on. I have to tell you, folks, I thought about that as I watched it. And, you know, I said to myself, I would have gone to Brian Peck, pulled him aside. And I think I told you all the story about doing this one time with a teacher at a school where my daughters were attending, and I didn't like his familiarity with my daughters. I pulled him aside and told him and put him on notice that I was watching. I'd have pulled him aside and said, look, keep your hands off my son. I see the way you touch him. I don't like it. It's not normal. No man should do that with a young boy. So I don't know where you're coming from. I'm not accusing you of being a homosexual or a pedophile, but what I'm telling you is I don't like what I'm seeing, and you are to stop it. And stop it now. And if I catch you doing it again, you and I are going to have more than words. Okay, let's just be clear. I am watching you like a hawk. Now, of course, he's going to go off and complain to the executives. Oh, his father threatened me and all this, And then you say to the executives, look, that is my son, and I don't like the way he touches him. Because, he said to somebody, they said, oh, well, maybe you're homophobic. You know what I'd have said? I'd have said, you can call me whatever label you want to call me. A man shouldn't be touching a boy the way he's touching my son, and I'm not having it. Period. Now, you call it whatever you want to call it. I guarantee you, he'd have stopped messing with that kid. Because he would have known what the implied threat was. And the implied threat was, I will beat your brains out. Or worse, if you mess with my son. Now, again, that was at the level where there wasn't really a whole lot the law was going to do because he hadn't really done anything illegal per se. But to think how oblivious he was that when he found out this guy had been arrested and convicted, he said to his son, Drake Bell's father said to him, I'm sure glad he didn't get to you. It was precisely his son that he had gotten to. And Drake Bell said, I couldn't even tell my dad at that point. He said, because his dad said, because I knew he wasn't right. I knew there was something wrong with him. But instead of fighting for your child, you kind of abdicated. And I'm sure he did the best he knew to do at that point. And maybe, people might say, but you're being a little bit too aggressive. But which would you rather have? A father as aggressive as what I've just expressed, who protects his son from that kind of treatment? Or a father who, like him, has to weep and cry over the fact that for years his son had every unspeakable thing done to him. And apparently the things that he did to him were so bad that he couldn't even say them. But they put little flashes up on the screen in the charges because he had to tell the detectives exactly what happened. And they showed it. I mean, it's horrible. This kid was, to me, it was torture. It was not just sexual abuse, it was torture. At any rate, I went into all of that because I really believe that what is happening right now, the extreme rhetoric that we're seeing, Maxine Waters, they're preparing for civil war. No, we're not. No, we're not. Now, conservatives are always prepared to defend ourselves, or at least you should be. You've got a God-given right to do so. That right is protected by the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, the right to keep and bear arms. So you do have a right to defend yourself, your family, your property. Certainly you do. But we're not up in the hills preparing for some civil war. We're busy fighting the good fight of faith and within the political realm trying to get Donald Trump elected and trying to get good people elected. Because the Bible says in Proverbs 14:34, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked bear rule, the people mourn. And we want the righteous in authority. Didn't say the perfect. The righteous meaning people who actually believe that there are right standards and that those standards come from God. But she's talking about we're up in the hills preparing for civil war. Jeff Katzenberg. Jeff Katzenberg is, what was his role? Former Disney boss, as a matter of fact. Former president of the Disney pedophile organization. That's right, I called him that because I mean it. And you running around hiring people who are convicted sex offenders, and that's documented. I've got several cases I've saved of Disney hiring people who were convicted sex offenders, convicted child molesters. What else would I call you? All those resources you've got, and you can't figure out what people have done terrible things to children? No, they're giving them a safe haven. That's what they're doing. So I don't know to what extent Jeff Katzenberg was involved in this, but he's running around talking about Hitler. Donald Trump is the next Hitler. Again, whatever they're saying about us, That's what they have in mind. Because look, Joe Biden won't even defend Israel in this critical moment in history. He won't come against terror, the terrorism of Hamas, in a clear and unequivocal way. He won't condemn the anti-Semitism that's on college campuses. Donald Trump made Jerusalem, recognized Jerusalem, as the undivided capital of the United States of America. Donald Trump was an absolutely unswerving ally of Israel. Donald Trump has spoken unequivocally against the anti-Semitism going on in campuses. But this guy calls Trump Hitler, and I guess Biden is who we got to elect Biden, because he's just great for Jewish people. See, here's what I'm getting to. I think that these people are really trying to set us up for a major show of violence. Let me add one other thing to this. This judge, this corrupt judge that's presiding over Donald Trump's ridiculous show trial, is claiming that, Donald Trump's violating the gag order and he may have to put him in jail. I really believe that they want to put Donald Trump in jail. And again, forgive me if this seems a little bit conspiratorial, because I told you I'm not conspiratorial, but I can't help but go here because of all of the other evidence that I see, all the other things I see. Hoping that putting Donald Trump in jail will cause a major eruption of violence that they can then turn the apparatus of the government on us. And when I say on us, I mean conservatives, Christians, all of us who would be incensed by seeing our government act like a third world banana republic and put a former president in jail because he's talking. He's a candidate for president of the United States, and they want to put him in jail because he's talking. I think they really hope that all of this rhetoric, this extreme rhetoric, they're preparing for civil war. Donald Trump's the next Hitler. We may have to put Donald Trump in jail because that at some point they will trigger a major uprising, upheaval in our country that would allow them to actually bring out the full force of the military, law enforcement, everybody else to kill the conservative movement. And I use that word kill intentionally. To kill the conservative movement. I don't mean that doesn't mean necessarily that they would just go out and mass slaughter people, because obviously there are a lot of Americans in the military and in law enforcement that are not going to go for that. They say, you're not going to get me to kill my fellow citizens because you don't agree with what they say. We didn't do that. January 6th was supposed to be an insurrection. And nobody went in there and committed mass slaughter because they knew that that would have been against the law and that would have been completely and totally wrong. And I don't think you could get law enforcement or most people in the military to go along with something that heinous or frankly, anything heinous for the most part. So, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't try. That doesn't mean they wouldn't try. But they need justification. It's a civil war. It's like it's an insurrection. They need justification. Donald Trump's a Hitler. Remember, they compared Donald Trump to Osama bin Laden at one point? And I would say the same thing about Osama bin Laden and Osama bin Laden and Adolf Hitler. Would anybody say that those people didn't deserve death and that the world would be a better place if they were killed? Of course we would. Of course we would. Is there anybody who thought it was a terrible, regretful thing that Adolf Hitler should have been hanged, frankly, or executed? He ended up killing himself. But if anybody said if we caught him and he'd been executed, oh man, that's a terrible thing. You can't execute Adolf Hitler. No. The world would have rejoiced and said he got what he deserved. Even though Mussolini got it at the hands of his own people and without a trial, of course, they just executed him and his wife. And again, I'm not in support of lawlessness ever, But does anybody regret that Mussolini died? Of course not. Because he was a megalomaniac, just like Adolf Hitler. He just didn't have as much power as Hitler had. So if you're going to compare Donald Trump to those people, to me, the subliminal message is somebody ought to kill Donald Trump. That's the subliminal message. I mean, if he's an Adolf Hitler, if he's a Osama bin Laden, if he wants to be a dictator. See, this rhetoric is intended to precipitate a violent reaction on our part so that they can say, see, we told you. We told you these people are nuts. And the only way we're going to help our country is we got to get rid of them, put them in jail. Look at what they did to the January 6 people. Now, many of those people didn't hurt a soul, committed absolutely no acts of violence. You got people walking the streets right now who've actually committed heinous acts of violence. You got people being led into the country right now. We got a kid, illegal immigrant, I just read the story this morning, in jail right now for having raped a young girl, and he came here convicted already of molestation of an underage child. And we brought him onto our streets. The January 6 people, some of them are facing 22 years in prison. Now again, folks, you prove to me lawlessness, I say, you got to be punished for it. But the punishment should fit the crime. You don't build it up. It was an insurrection. It was almost the end of democracy. And so we got to lock these people up for life. And we got to put them in dungeons. We got to deny them their fundamental constitutional rights. Because after all, these are terrible people who almost overthrew our country. Hogwash. And we know this stuff is nothing but political. And all the people were ushered in. They actually went out and arrested people who walked in with the crowd and then turned around and came out a few minutes later. And they actually hunted those people down and arrested them. And you got people who have committed rape and robbery and murder who are let out the very same day they commit the crime. And nobody hunts them down. The guy who I just mentioned, I have his name in my news stack, but you know, when he was let in, you know, he was given a court date. You know what the court date was? This was last year he was let in. You know what his court date was? 2027. A convicted child molester who we want to process into the country. I mean, but conservative Americans, traditional Catholics, pro-life people, they're dangerous. They're a danger to the country. I mean, you've got riots happening in college campuses all over the country. When you start taking over buildings, you start kidnapping people, you start holding people hostage, you start destroying property, those are riots. Those are not protests. But what are we being told? We're negotiating with them. We're trying to come to an accommodation. You know what word I haven't heard at all when this has happened apparently on 200 campuses across America? I haven't heard the word insurrection. Have you? Burning American flags, death to America. But I have not heard the word insurrection. Have you heard it? No. Threats to people. I think a lot of this stuff is calculated to try to get a reaction from conservatives, from Christians, from maybe, you know, really serious Republicans. I'm not sure how many of those there are, precious few in my view, but conservative Republicans who really love our country, love the Constitution, love the rule of law, want everybody in our country to be able to do well. We don't hate anybody. We're not against anybody thriving in our country. That's what the country is for. We want everybody to thrive. We're not out saying we hate homosexuals. We want them dead. Nope. Listen, they can live their private lives however they want. What we don't want is them trying to change the nature of our culture. We don't want to kill people who are killing unborn babies. We want to persuade them otherwise, and we want the law to stop them from doing it. But we don't want to hurt them. We don't want to kill them. We want them to find another way to earn a living other than by the blood of innocent babies. But apparently they don't feel quite the same way toward us. And I really think that that's what they want. They want us to be so convinced that our backs are up against the wall that we end up lashing out in violence so that they can say, okay, we told you, now we got to put them down. We've got to outthink these people. We really do. We've got to outthink them. We've got to be strategic. Okay? Not just emotional and visceral, but strategic. We've got a big brewing confrontation in the House right now between Speaker Johnson and Marjorie Taylor Greene and a couple of others. And look, by the way, in terms of my sympathy right now, although I was elated that Mike Johnson, a born-again believer, was elected to the speakership, I am not happy with him at all. However, I think that my friend Bob Good, Congressman Bob Good, 5th Congressional District, is right. Now is not the time. It's just not the time. There's too much else at stake. You're holding on to the House by one vote. One vote. And although I think Speaker Johnson ought to be fighting rather than capitulating, let's deal with that after we get Donald Trump elected president. And maybe increase our margin in the House and maybe take over the Senate. Then we can start talking about a speaker who's really got an agenda for the country, like a Jim Jordan, who's the old wrestler Jim Jordan, who doesn't mind grappling, who doesn't mind getting down with it. I mean, who will throw down. Mike Johnson's apparently not the type who will throw down. But I don't want to see a big fight happen in the House right now because the only ones who can benefit from that are Democrats. They're only going to get more of what they want, not less. Because they've certainly got the votes in a divided Republican caucus. They've certainly got the votes to determine or to have a tremendous influence on who ends up being the speaker. That's a dangerous thing. I mean, so we've got to be not just visceral, not just emotional. We've got to be strategic. And listen, part of the reason why I'm more receptive to this notion of conspiracy theories is because I don't want to ignore any possibility, because I really believe that the left is demonically inspired and diabolical, and therefore there is nothing beneath them. So attributing to them some sort of lofty, inspired intentions is a big mistake because they don't have them. I told you, operating in a framework of sin is never about serving people. It's always about one's own selfish desires and ambitions. And you think about that. Think about that. Any framework of sin that you can come up with, you show me where that's about trying to be a help and a blessing to other people. It ain't. Forgive the language. It ain't. It's not. The Bible says that in the last days men will be lovers of themselves and haters of God, and that's exactly what we're dealing with. All right, well, look, I didn't get as far as I intended to go with that because there's some other stories I wanted to bring up with you, but I'm going to have to save those until tomorrow. I've been talking about the rise of anti-Christian bigotry, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to continue with this theme tomorrow and show you some other things that I want you to be thinking about as I give you this framework of what the left is doing, how they're trying to play us in order to position us where they want us so that they can do with us what they want to do. And we can't let it happen. Go to standamerica.us for our dinner to check out more about that. Standamerica.us. Standamerica.us for the dinner, for sponsorships. We really need your help. We need your prayers. Do what you can to support us. We're deeply appreciative. And you can check out the website and find out all the stuff we're doing, because you'll find out we are extended beyond our human capability by the grace of God. We're doing really more than the small staff we have is capable of doing in the natural. But God is adding his super to our natural, and we're getting a supernatural result. And this dinner is going to be just another instance of that. So God bless each and every one of you. So look, no matter what they're doing, conspiracy or not, no matter what they're doing, projecting or not, stand up, step up, speak up, refuse to back up. Because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit. Because we are on God's side. You know what? Let me say one other thing. Don't forget to join me today at 12 noon. Ooh, let me make sure, folks. 12 noon for our National Awakening Coalition conference call. I'm pretty sure we're having it. This is terrible, isn't it? I'm pretty sure we're having it. Let me just double check that just before you go. Just stand by 1 second, because obviously I don't plan these. Oh, yes. Bishop Garland Hunt, who's going to be talking to us about the late Bishop Dean Nelson, and we're going to be talking about the work he did for the Frederick Douglass Institute, the foundation, and the pro-life work that he did, and why we're honoring him. This is one you don't want to miss, folks. Bishop Garland Hunt is another one of these black conservatives across the country. There's a network of us out there, and we're trying to put us all together so that we can make an impact in behalf of this nation, because we're doing it not to serve ourselves, but to serve America. God bless.